Hey everybody, welcome back to the shop. So you bought one of these guys, or maybe an X-Carve, or if you're like Dana from Bucky's Customs, you bought a long mill. Those are all great machines. They all come with some proprietary software. Now, once you get used to that basic software, you might want to upgrade to Carveco. Now, you bought Carveco, you bought CNC, where do you begin? That's where we're going to start today with the basics. I'm going to show you how to carve your very first project, or one of your very first projects, a simple welcome sign that you could give to a friend, give to a relative, maybe make a few and sell them at a local craft fair. Now, I've done some complicated carves. They're on my channel. You can check them out if you'd like. But today we're going to start from the basics. A very simple sign, very simple programming, something that you can do for your first project. Let's get started. Let's get on the computer.
Okay, so the first step is to locate the Carveco icon, which is right here, and double click that. You'll be greeted with the Carveco maker sign, and then a screen that looks something like this. Now, you won't have all of these recent projects in here because obviously you haven't done that many, or maybe you have, but in most cases this area will be blank. Now remember, as I always say when we start this, that the way I'm doing this sign is my way. There are several ways to program things in Carveco, so if you find a different method or someone suggests a different method, that's okay too. But in this case, this is how I'm going to make this sign. We're going to start by clicking on New Model. You'll be greeted with the New Model menu. Up here is where you set your size of your workpiece. In this case, the size is correct. It is in inches. I work in inches most of the time. So the width we want is 16 inches. The height is 7.5. And the reason for that is so that you can go to any big box store, any lumber yard, and get a 1x8, and you can make this particular sign. Now, I'm going to make this one in MDF because MDF is the most forgiving, and it was what I had in the shop to do this demonstration with. So, next step is to take your origin, which is here in the center, and move it to bottom left, like that. Now, any other project, you can click up here, all these four corners, or back in the center. And a lot of times I'll use the center origin position, but in this case, let's do bottom left. Once you have that set, you're okay. Now, the resolution does not need to be adjusted until you're into more complex carves, but if you were to adjust it, you can grab it and slide it left or right. I'm not going to get into a detailed explanation of why you would move that. Again, this is going to be a basic tutorial. So we now have our dimensions set, we have our work area set, we have the origin where we want it, it's in inches. Click OK. And there we have a workspace. Now, in Carveco, you can work in two different dimensions. You can work in a 3D view or a 2D view. For this project, I recommend clicking on this tab over here to change it to a 2D view. And as you can see now, it's a different color, a little easier to see in some cases. So the first thing we're going to do is decide on the size that we want for this sign. And in this case, the sign's not actually going to be 7.5 by 16. We're going to reduce that to 6 by 14. What we're going to need is an outside border. And to do that, we're going to come over here on the left. You've got these images here, or these icons. You're going to click on the square. You're going to see that you now have a crosshair. Instead of an arrow like this, you'll have a crosshair. Click anywhere on the screen. Technically, or typically, I would do it on the project. Click, hold the button down, drag to the right, and drop down, and it makes a rectangle for you. Now over here on the right hand side, you can change from rectangle to square. In this case, obviously we're using a rectangle, so leave that alone. In here you can enter numerically what size we want. So for a width, I said we wanted 14. So we'll enter 14, and you can see that the box is changing in real time as we do this. And the bottom, the height, we want 6 inches. Don't get worried that this isn't in the center because it will be in just a minute. Alright, so now we have a work surface or a project that is 6 by 14 or 14 by 6, depending on which way you look at this. You can leave this square, or You can come over here to these dots on each corner, left click and hold and pull in, and you can make the corners round. And this is all a preference type setting. You can pull these in until it's a complete ellipse, or you can leave them alone. You can go in just a little bit. If you come over to this side again, you can set that quarter radius numerically right here. So in this case, I want to do a 1-inch radius. That's just a preference again. If you wanted something different, you could always do something different. Just so that you're aware, we have a little checkbox here that says invert corners. I'm going to do this just to show you what happens. When you click on that, it scallops the corners. This particular sign does not have scallop corners, so we're going to uncheck that. We're going to go down here to the word create. If you don't click create when you're finished making these adjustments, your next click on any other tool will delete that square. So we click on create, and you now have the square. If you go to the arrow and click on the arrow, click off of the image, and you can see that the image is there, but it's to the right. We want it dead center of our work surface. So click on the square, push F9 on your keyboard, and it pops it into the center. What I like to do with my welcome signs is create a shoulder on the edge that elevates the center portion of the sign just a little bit. Kind of hard to explain, but bear with me here and I'll show you what we're talking about. But in order to do this, what we'll do is, if you haven't got this highlighted, we'll click on it to highlight. One more point just to be made here quickly. You don't have to put the arrow directly on the project and click on it. If you hold to the left of any project or any vector or any line that you'd like to light up or make active, click and hold the left mouse key, drag across, and when you release it, it'll select the area. And you can do that on any vector in any project. Alright, so now we have this highlighted again. What I want to do is create what they call an offset, and I want this offset inward, just under 1/4 of an inch wide, because when we create the shoulder that's going to go around here, we're going to use a 1/4 inch end mill, and I want the end mill to create a clean shoulder between the sign and the edge of the project. So let's create that shoulder. Come down here on the left where your tools are, and click this downward arrow into an arch. It's called an offset tool. Back on the right hand side here, you'll see that you have a whole bunch of things that you can decide. So the offset distance we're going to use is 0.2. That's correct. And the direction that I want the shoulder to go, or the offset, is inward. From this line, I want the offset to go in towards the center. That is correct. Now, if I had it outward, obviously, it would go out 0.20 inches. So this is correct. Sharp corners, I always have it selected. The other thing I select is down here that says select the resulting offset. What that means is, you can see that this one is highlighted and it's active. Once we do the offset, this one will not be active. The one that is created will become active. So let's hit offset and see what happens. As you can see now, we have a second line, and the second line is activated. That is our shoulder right there. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can see. You can see that there's a double line here, and it's creating a shoulder. So we're good there. We don't need the offset tool any further. Close that out. And now the fun part. We want to put the word in here, the welcome word. Come over here to the letter T, which stands for your fonts, or text, or whatever you want to call it. Not whatever you want to call it, it's for text. Click on the sign anywhere, because again, we're going to adjust this to the center after we create the letters. So let's start typing the word welcome. Now, as you can see, it's enormous. It's way bigger than what we want on the sign, but don't panic. Again, we're going to make these adjustments and things will get corrected. But the one thing I want to point out to you is a couple of things, actually. If you see this symbol that is a bent arrow, for lack of a better term. If you left click and hold, you can now turn your image. And that goes for any time that thing is lit. All right, we don't want it turned too much, so we're going to leave it alone. If you want to adjust this or change the text to a different style, just like in any Word document, you'll be looking for this type of symbol near the end of the word, left click and drag across, and you can see now that that word is highlighted. So if we wanted to change this to a different text, we would come to the top here where the text font is, click on that, and here you can select any number of your texts. However, there's another trick that you can do. If you click on that again, you see it disappears, but you now can use the up and down arrows on your keyboard to change the text in real time so you can look and see what it's going to look like on your project. Now, we are using, in this case, we're going to use Art Script. I just happen to like the way that looks. So that is the correct font, but I wanted to show you how you could change it. Just like with the square, if you scroll down, you have to hit Create, or this will disappear with your next move. But let's go back and make sure that you have the same selections I do so that things will turn out the right way. Scale width is 250%, scale height is 129, rotation is 0. That's used to rotate your text, obviously. Character is 100% of the space, line is 1 inches, kerning is on. Again, I'm not going to go into a detailed explanation of what all these are. This is a basic tutorial. Width is 12, height is 12. That's a material. We don't need to worry about that at this point. Go to the bottom and click Create. And there we have it. Now, just so that I can get this thing into the center so that it looks a little more correct, we're going to hit F9 again. And you can see that it jumps. It's still too wide, obviously, but it is in the center. Now, in order to correct that, go up here to this throwing star looking thing, which we call the transform tool, and click on that. Again, these little dots appear. What I do is grab the top dot until the arrow changes to a directional arrow, left click and hold, and pull up on the word to stretch the word out. Again, this is going to be a preference type of selection. You know, is this how big you want the letters, or do you want them smaller? That's all a personal choice. After you've stretched the word to the height that you're looking for, come over to the right side or left side, left click and drag in to bring the letters into the space. Both sides. We can adjust this more so once we get it back in the center. Hit F9 again. If you want a better look at it, you can click off of it to see what it looks like. It looks pretty good, but this area right here looks a little bit close, as does this. So we'll click on it one more time. Again, you can click on these lines if you want to, or you can hover below it, left click, and drag. And it'll highlight that and make it active again. Back up to the throwing star, and we'll pull this in just a little bit more on each side. And don't worry about it being in the center until you hit F9. It'll correct all of the adjustments. Hit F9 once more. Click off of your image to see that everything looks good. And that, to me, looks fairly good. So the next step is to create toolpaths. This carving is going to require 2 separate bits. Don't get nervous. I'm going to show you how you can do that if you don't have a bit setter or if you don't have Pawn CNC's collars. We'll separate the files out so that you can actually do, in a sense, it'll be 2 separate carves on one project. I guess not in a sense, but it will be 2 separate carves, 2 separate files to create this. Now, when I do toolpaths, I start in the center. I start with the stuff inside first. So we'll click on the welcome portion. We're going to do a V-bit carving here. Go over to the right and click on toolpaths. It'll open this menu screen. You can use these tools down in here Or you can go across the top and click on these tools as needed. We're going to do a V-bit toolpath, so I'm going to click on this one. As you can see, it says Create V-bit Carving Toolpath, and it opens up our menu that lets us make the selections to tell this machine what we want it to do. So our starting depth is 0. We want it to start right on the top of the stock. We definitely want to limit the maximum depth that the machine will travel downward into the material. So we'll click this box here. And I recommend a maximum depth of 1/8 of an inch, which is 0.125 inches. Scrolling down, we need to select a tool in order to tell this thing to do the job. So click to select tool. We're going to use a 90-degree V-bit. Push select. Click on it one more time, the same area you chose the first time, to select a tool, and it will open up this way. Now, if you're using MDF is a very forgiving medium. You can increase the speed that the machine cuts these letters out. So that's done right here under feed rate. And you can actually increase that to 75, and you'll be perfectly fine. Continue scrolling down. We're not going to use a roughing tool in this case, and a roughing tool simply is another tool that will go around and remove the bulk of the material before you start using the V-bit. There's no need to do that on this carve, so we're not going to select the roughing tool. We want our safe Z height to be 0.25, and you can get closer if you're brave, but 0.25 is what I feel comfortable with. I know it's not going to run into my clamping system and wreck a tool, and therefore it's also not too high that it takes forever to go from this tool to this tool to this tool to this tool, and so on and so forth. Now we need to click to define the material, and as you can see, you have 0, 0 here. And in this case, the material that I'm using is 3/4 inch MDF, so you'll put 0.75 in there. Click OK. Now you'll come down to the naming area. You're going to give it a name. Obviously, if it's a welcome sign, let's call it welcome. Calculate now. What I did here was took a torch and burned the top of that MDF to make it easier for you all to be able to see it, and it does give it a pretty neat effect when it's finished. Just apply some polyurethane and you got yourself a pretty little welcome sign. So close out the V-bit carving tool menu, and you have this now complete. To make things easier for you, if you come over to this side, the right hand side, click on these 2 light bulbs, you can see that it has shut off your previous toolpaths. The next toolpath we need is the first line right here, the first offset that we created. So click on that, and now we're going to do a profiling toolpath, which is simply a way to tell the machine to go along this line, either on the outside of the line, on the inside of the line, or directly on top of the line. We want to create that shoulder, so we want to remove some material right here. So we're going to click on the profiling tool. Again, you click on toolpaths. This T here is the profiling toolpath, or you can click on this one up here. It doesn't matter, either or. So you'll get your profiling tool menu. Now, as I said, we want to tell the tool to run either on the outside, inside, or right directly on the vector. And that's a choice that you'll have to make differently for each tool or each project that you're producing. In this case, we want the inside edge of the tool running on the outside edge of the line. So outside is the correct selection. If you click on this drop down, you'll see along, inside, and outside. Along is telling the bit to be dead center over top of this line all the way across. Outside will tell it to be along the outside edge of this line. And inside, if you chose it, would run the inside edge of the tool along the inside edge of that line. We are looking for outside. Sharp corners. Starting depth is 0. And what we want to do is remove a 1/2 of an inch of material to leave us 1/4 of an inch worth of shoulder along this side. So we'll change the finish depth to 0.5, 1/2 of an inch. Tolerance is 001, that's correct. Again, we need to click to select a tool. In this case, we're going to use a 1/4 inch flat end mill, a down cut end mill. Obviously, it doesn't say down cut in here. You will choose that from your tool selections in your shop. If you don't have a down cut, you can use an up cut. It really doesn't matter, but being that this is MDF, it makes a much cleaner line when you're finished. It's less sanding and cleanup. Cutting direction is climb, that's correct. We don't need lead-in moves, we don't need ramping moves. We don't need to add bridges in this tool path. When we do the outside line, we will add tool bridges. Safe Z again is correct. Material thickness has already been set up. So let's give this a name. We'll call this the welcome shoulder. And you can name these anything you like, but being specific with these names helps you locate them easier to make corrections if you do something wrong. So if we close that out, by that I mean you can click on toolpaths, double click, and you can see that we have the welcome toolpath, which was our our word, and we have the welcome shoulder, which is this one here. Again, if we click on these light bulbs on this side, we can get rid of the toolpaths, and it makes it easier to see when you're doing a more complex carve than this. It's important to do that. Alright, last toolpath is the outside line, which will cut this piece or this sign free from this board. We're going to go back to a profiling toolpath. Again, we want to be along the outside. Sharp corners, yes. The finish depth in this case is 0.75. We want to cut the sign loose from the base material. So 0.75 is correct. Click to select a tool. We're going back to the same 1/4 inch end mill. We're not adjusting any feeds or speeds. It's not necessary. In this case, we want to add bridges, because if you don't add bridges, there's a possibility that this sign could get loose and could cause damage to your router, to the bit. It could ruin the sign. So you want to hold it in place until you're finished carving, and that's what these bridges do. I have another video that explains these in more detail. You can look for those on the channel as well. But in this case, what I would recommend is a bridge that's a 1/2 of an inch long, 1/4 of an inch high. I would use 3D bridges. They're faster when they're cut. And I would have a constant number of 4. If you click this, you can change it to adaptive spacing, constant spacing, and again, if you watch the other video, I go into in-depth on what that means. So let's add the bridges. You can see that they've appeared here now. Safe Z is correct. Material thickness is correct. Now let's give this a name. I'll call this welcome cut off. Calculate that now. Close out this menu. We don't need it any longer. And we should be good to go. So let's go over here and see if we're good to go. Click on Toolpaths. Scroll down here to the bottom to Simulation. Click on Simulation, and it's going to basically create your sign. It'll give you a visual indicator whether or not you've made the correct selections. So let's click on Simulation. And as you can see, we now have a sign. If you push down on the space bar, left click your mouse and hold, you can move the sign around to get a better look at what it's going to look like. And you can confirm that it's going to do what you're asking it to do. Now, when you get it out of alignment and you can't get it to go back, push on this box and it will center it for you one more time. Click on simulation. Down here to the garbage can and delete the simulation. Oh no, your image is gone. It's not gone. Over here to this symbol will bring it back. So click on that, and there it is. It's back. Now the next step from here is to save all those toolpaths you've created, and we're going to get into that next. Okay, so one more thing before we save the toolpaths that I just thought of. If you're up here on the top right, there's a question mark right here. If you click on that question mark, it'll open up a guidance menu type of setup. By that I mean you can actually read what each of these things mean, and when you're doing toolpaths, let's click on a toolpath, for example, a profiling toolpath, you can now see that it gives you a description of what this is. If we click on the question mark again, you can see that it's gone. It's just a little tip to help you if you can't remember what something is or what it does. Carveco was good enough to put this in there to help you. We're not going to do another toolpath though, we're going to save them. So with the question mark turned on, we can see that this is Save Toolpaths. Click on that, and you will be greeted with this screen here. Now I've explained this before, but I'll do it once more just so that everybody's clear. On the left hand side I call this the inactive screen. On the right hand side I call this the active screen. When you create files to do carving, anything you put in the active side and you save will now become a toolpath that you can tell your machine to work off of. So what we're going to do is create two separate toolpaths so that you don't have to have a bit setter or PWNCNC's collars to produce this sign. I highly recommend PWNCNC collars. I'll leave a link to them below, and you've seen in some other videos, if you could check them out, that they allow you to switch between bits without having to re-zero anything. But in any case, we're not going to cut the project off first, so highlight that, and you use these arrows to move items back and forth in between inactive and active side. Let's begin with the V-bit portion. So we'll click this to remove this from the active side. We'll highlight the V-bit. We'll click this arrow to bring it back. We now have it on this side. We'll go down here to the bottom, and I typically save everything to my desktop that I'm going to carve. When I'm finished carving and finished with the project, I then dump it into a different file. It just makes it easier for me to find it when I'm looking for it out in the shop. So, V-bit, we got to give it a name down here. Let's call it welcome. You type in welcome there. Then here where it says machine file format, Carveco has numerous systems to choose from in order to find a G-code format that will work with whatever machine you have. I happen to have a Shapeoko, so mine is Carbide 3D. Select that, you have a name, you've saved it on the desktop, click save. You get just a little bit of a blip there, hit it again, and you can see that it says, do you want to override it? Yes, I do. I'm not really overriding anything. I just use that as an insurance type thing to make sure that this toolpath is now saved on my desktop. Okay, so that's one file. When you load your stock into your machine, you'll open up this file and you will carve out the word once more, welcome. When you're finished with that, you will then open up the next file that we're going to create. So we're going to take this welcome and we're going to move it to the inactive side. We're going to take the welcome shoulder, bring it over to the active side. The welcome cutoff, bring that over to the active side. Now, when you do this, the order in which these processes take place is from top to bottom. So you obviously don't want the machine to cut the piece loose before you do the shoulder. If it was the other way around, where they were inverted, highlight the tool that you want to change so that you can get these in the correct order. Highlight it and click the down arrow to move it to where you want those. So now it's in the correct sequence. It's going to create the shoulder first, Then it's going to cut the item loose. Same as before, you'll come down here and choose a name that's specific to this toolpath. You don't have to reselect that. Once you've done it, Carveco remembers it. Hit save. Now see, I didn't change the name there, so it's going to override this toolpath. You don't want to do that. That's the importance of changing this name. No, I don't want to override it. I want to put a different name in there. We're going to call that cutoff. So now if I save it, you get a little blip again, barely seen. Save again, welcome cutoff. Click for insurance. Close this out. Let's minimize Carveco and prove that that's on the desktop. And it's right there, welcome cutoff and welcome down here. So we are good to go with those toolpaths. Now we can go out to the shop, load the stock into the machine, open up whatever G-Sender type software you use. In our case, it's Carbide Motion, and begin to make this sign. Okay, so I know this video is getting a little long, but I want to do this as quickly as I can for you. Take your V-bit, eyeball it to the corner as precisely as you can, 0, X, and Y, then back the V-bit over to more on top of the wood or your stock. Using the paper method, lower the bit slowly until it just touches the paper, then zero out your Z. Once you finish that, carve out the word welcome, switch to the different file. Once it's complete, that's the PWNCNC collar. What that does is it's a definite stop. You don't have to re-zero anything. You would do this all in one file with those. The machine would stop and prompt you to change the tool. You would start over and you're back in business. In this case, just re-zero the Z. Don't re-zero X and Y. Push start and you're back in business. You can run the second file. And there you have it, everybody. A simple welcome sign. Sorry the video took a little longer than normal, but I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something. I hope you got something out of the video. As always, give us a like, share, and a comment. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already. And as always, we'll catch you on the next one.